Welcome everybody. We've got about a minute. So we'll give a chance for some more people to sign on. So we'll start in about 2 minutes. Okay, we've got people coming in. All right, everybody. Welcome to the second New York Sea Grant Summer Virtual Seminar Series featuring Dr. Jace Bernhardt at Hofstra University, who will give a presentation on using virtual reality to educate beachgoers about rip currents. Before we start, I just want to remind everyone that there will be a survey on the presentation, and I will present the link in the chat. And also our next virtual seminar will be in August, and will feature Dr. Scott Steinschneider, and we'll have details about that coming up. Kathleen, are you available?
Yeah, I'm here.
So I'm going to have you introduce Jace, and were you going to present some information, a couple slides on our beach safety program?
I don't have anything to present, but I can mention a few things about it.
All right, go right ahead and introduce Jace, and then I'll turn the hosting over so he can share his screen. Thanks, Kathleen.
No problem. So New York Sea Grant is interested in promoting rip current education and awareness. We are currently working on building up a new program. We've had a new rip current fact sheet that is available on our website, and we have a couple of more projects that we're working on right now. Currently, something we're working on is a new summer. It's related to COVID rapid response campaign about beach safely. And we are every week promoting pushing out a new social media campaign. The first week was titled Stay Social, Be Distant, and talked about, enjoying the beach safely while, social distancing this summer. And then this week's graphic was about rip currents, promoting the messaging of flip, float, follow. That went out earlier this morning. We release them every Thursday, and we are going to be doing so through Labor Day. So New York Sea Grant is very invested in getting the information about rip currents out. And we're really excited to have been able to work with Dr. Jace Bernhardt while he developed this new virtual reality rip current. simulation, and I'm so excited for you guys to hear and see all about it. Jace is a professor at Hofstra University, and I will let him talk more about what he did last year. Thanks, Lane.
Thank you, Kathleen. And now I'll introduce Jace. You should be able to share your screen and present your presentation and take it away.
Great. Thanks so much, Lane and Kathleen, for the introduction and for having me today. As mentioned, my name is Jace Bernhardt. I'm an assistant professor at Hofstra University in the Department of Geology, Environment, and Sustainability. I know that's a bit of a mouthful, but I'm focused on teaching classes in meteorology, hence the lightning background in my Zoom, and climate change, as well as some sustainability. So today I'll be speaking about the research I've been working on for the past year and a half or so now. So before we get going, just wanted to make a few acknowledgements. First of all, thank you, of course, to New York Sea Grant for this funding opportunity as part of the New York Sea Grant Out of Cycle program, and to all the staff at New York Sea Grant for making that possible. And specifically, thank you to Kathleen for really being my go-to contact at New York Sea Grant and helping facilitate a lot of this work. I had two co-PIs on this project, Greg Dusek. He's from National Ocean Service, and he is one of the leading rip current experts. So he provided some amazing insight into how to design a rip current in a virtual space. And Ariel Hesse, a social scientist at Drexel University, and she provided invaluable input as a social scientist in terms of putting together and running an effective survey for seeing what people thought of all this and how they reacted. Also received a lot of help from the Hofstra University education technology with the equipment and creating the simulation. And then I had several Hofstra University student research assistants who helped disseminate the survey and analyze the data and put things together. So lots and lots of assistance from other folks to make this exciting work happen. So to start off with some basics, I know we might have some different levels of expertise in this talk, so apologies if it's review for some of you. But quickly, a little bit of background on rip currents. Rip currents are strong flows or currents of water that can rapidly pull swimmers away from the shore, and they often come with little or no immediate warning. They're going to pull swimmers, of course, perpendicular away from the shore. And important to note that rip currents will not pull swimmers directly underwater. So there's a big gap here between sort of knowledge of rip currents and then what they actually do. And just the effect of being caught in rip current often causes ocean swimmers to panic. And that in turn leads to poor outcomes, especially when they're swimming on unguarded beaches. So really, this whole premise sets up this critical link we have for many hazards, and rip current is a prime example of this. There's this link between hazard communication and public understanding of them, and often there's that gap between how we as scientists understand a hazard and communicate it, but what ends up sort of being remembered by the public as to how to mitigate that hazard sometimes might be lost or incomplete. So then, for example, even though rip current doesn't take people underwater directly, the public, many in the public might think that it does, and then that triggers a panic response, leads to some issues. Rip currents are often going to form in areas where there's jetties or sandbars or something that restricts the flow. So then you have the breaking waves heading towards the shore, and then as the flow naturally comes back out away from the beach back into the ocean, the flow is increased, for example, because of that narrow volume, velocity going up as you channel something through a smaller space, in this case between the two sandbars. So you suddenly can get this fast flow of water, again, working as the arrows show, perpendicular away from the beach. Rip currents, when you're right there in the water, can be hard to spot because you're sort of right at the level where the phenomena is developing. If you can get up on a higher spot, a little bit away from the beach, or obviously have an aerial bird's eye sort of view, it can actually be fairly apparent where a rip current is occurring. So in the image on the left, it's actually where you don't see the white caps in the waves, because that's where the water is going the opposite way. Instead of the waves coming into shore and breaking, you have that flow just below the surface going back out away from shore. And again, working at that perpendicular 90-degree angle away from shore. And of course, very important because it starts dragging people directly away from shore, which can be an upsetting experience to have. And another thing to know, when you're sort of looking at the rip current from a distance, it becomes apparent because of the lack of white caps. But if you're right in a rip current, it can appear foamy and the water can have a slightly different color because the water is going away from shore instead of the white caps of the waves coming in. So right in the rip current, it can look a little bit different, but not necessarily that readily apparent unless you really have a trained eye on what a rip current might look like. So what's the motivation of working on rip currents in our particular project, which was using a virtual reality simulation and video game of getting caught in a rip current to try to improve communication of the hazard and overall awareness and understanding? Well, rip currents are often, to many people surprisingly, one of the deadliest weather hazards nationally in the US. Here's a breakdown of the top weather hazards by fatalities as tabulated by the National Weather Service. The yellow bar indicates the 30-year average, the blue bar the last 10 years, and the red bar just in 2019. And you see, no matter how you slice it, with either the 10-year decadal average or just 2019, rip currents are among the leading fatality makers, or in the upper half, perhaps surprising a lot of people. So for example, 72 people killed by rip currents last year alone, 60 on average over the entire decade. So that, of course, is 600 deaths nationwide in the past 10 years. All, of course, very preventable because the rip currents themselves aren't directly pulling people under. It's the human behavioral response which generally leads to these problems. And of course, that's something with intervention we can hope to fix as scientists and communicators. And locally, unfortunately, this is always a problem. It seems like just about every beach season, there's at least one or a few fatalities from rip currents. And often they end up on the Long Island ocean beaches. So there are a pair of fatalities in 2018, and we've had some again in 2019, both a few in Rockaway Beach in Queens, and then some out on the east end of Long Island. And then already there's been some this year as well, a bit earlier in the season. So unfortunately, it's a national problem, but also definitely a problem close to home. So starting to piece together a motivation, as I've been saying, it's a deadly phenomena, yet easily preventable. Really, any fatality from a weather hazard, we should think of as something that we can prevent. Obviously, a large storm like a hurricane or a tornado, which can happen almost instantaneously in some cases, maybe it's a bit harder to predict and prevent. But a rip current is obviously such an easy thing to take precaution from and then not have an issue. So it's really a perfect example of a problem we can work on with just improved communication to solve. And the big problem is lots of different work shows that still not that many beachgoers have a full and complete understanding of rip currents, what they are, how you identify them, and of course, most importantly, what do you do if you find you're getting caught in one. Some different surveys have shown a minority of beachgoers actually know about rip currents. For example, fewer than 30% of beachgoers can identify a rip current from a picture. These are surveys done in Texas and Florida, which are places with long beach seasons. So places like New York, where there's even a shorter beach season, perhaps even less of a chance that people can identify them and know what to do. So clearly a big problem we have here. So really what we're trying to do in this project then is to enhance scientific literacy of rip currents. And already, as Kathleen mentioned, New York Sea Grant has a fact sheet. National Weather Service, NOAA has fact sheets. Lots of great literature out there about rip currents, and this is one really great sleek graphic that I've seen posted up at beaches, this or a similar version that encapsulates in a small, just in one picture, what a rip current is and what you should do if you're caught in one. So this is great, and this is very visually appealing and very useful. However, as we know, people are just reticent to read things if it's posted at the beach or if it's online. There's ways to enhance just a static PDF or graphic or image. So how can we build off of this great literature that we have to further drive home the points about rip currents? And also not just put out this information. The bullet points are great, but as we all know, sometimes it's hard to sort of read instructions for something and then do it. It's ideal to actually perform the action, and then in real life how to do it. So for example, if you build on this and make a video game and place it with this literature, then in addition to reading what they can do, people will then play the video game and actually do it themselves. And then that should hopefully make the lesson last longer, and they'll definitely know what to do if they are caught in one in real life. So the objective of this research, therefore, is again the basic context of how to improve public understanding of rip currents. So we want to try to do so with a virtual reality VR video game. So virtual reality or VR is a growing technology, immersive technology, that is being used in a lot of cases for recreation, for video games, or simulating different activities, and it's getting quite popular in that sphere, but also more and more individuals are applying it to scientific problems. And I've actually done that in previous work, and my work and a lot of other studies when being applied to science or risk or emergency management has shown that VR virtual reality is a really engaging and memorable way to enhance written literature. For example, even the New York Times has put out virtual reality supplements with their articles, and then studies have found that people who read the article and also viewed the VR were more likely to recall the facts presented in the article than just people who read the text article and didn't do the VR. So it's clear that when you add this immersive experiential aspect to trying to convey knowledge, you end up with a more enduring, long-lasting lesson. And our team showed this on Long Island when we used VR to communicate information about a potential hurricane landfall, and found that people viewed a VR simulation of a hurricane hitting a suburban community, that residential area, that they'd be more likely to say they'd evacuate and take other precautions. And in particular, the water aspect of the hurricane VR is really powerful and impactful. Oftentimes people sort of underrated how bad storm surge can be. So being immersed in a VR simulation, having that water coming into your house and being trapped, having that water rise up to chest level in this 3D immersive 360-degree view space was very, very impactful and resonated with people and really made them realize that this is a hazard that you should take seriously, and just something you don't get necessarily from solely seeing some static pictures or even videos and written literature, where you can experience it in the 360-degree view and look around and have a surround sound and be fully immersed. That really seems to make a difference in conveying the hazard. So why not apply it to rip currents, where we have two big upsides? One, people are more immersed in it, as we've seen, that can be useful. And two, as I mentioned, having people directly get caught in a rip current and then figure out how to get out of it. They've done it in this video game space, then hopefully in real life, now that they've done it before in the video game, they'll more readily understand what to do and do it if caught in one in the actual ocean. So 2 research questions as a result for this work. So 1, looking at what we did, we put individuals in a rip current and came in with the research question of, what will they do? What will individuals do when caught in a rip And then will they take the proper actions or the improper actions, and which actions will be most popular? And our notion of proper actions are really two things. One, if you swim parallel to shore, of course, you'll then escape the rip current. It's only taking perpendicular, it's often a narrow channel rip current. So if you can swim parallel to shore, you can pretty quickly get out of the rip current channel and then swim back to the shore at that point, back to safety. Or waving for help. Again, the rip current doesn't drown you by itself. So if you calmly sort of stay there and try to float, tread water, whatever, and somehow call attention to yourself, then ideally a lifeguard will be able to come and rescue you or throw in a device to allow you to get pulled back. So those are two proper mitigating actions in terms of the risk. And of course, the improper action would be fighting the rip. Of course, it might be human nature to say, oh no, I'm getting pulled away from shore, pulled away. So I need to fight my way back towards shore right now before I get pulled out too far. But of course, that's the wrong thing to do because rip currents are very quick. So by fighting against it, you're not going to make any progress towards the shore. All you'll do is tire yourself out. And of course, especially a weaker swimmer, if you start getting tired, then you might end up going under. Not because of the rip current, but because you got tired trying to fight it. So by putting people in a video game, we can trap them in a rip and see what they'll do, and all the better it's in the VR space. So it really is realistic and lifelike. And then number two is then doing a follow-up survey to try to understand, is this method of the VR video game useful in helping people understand rip currents and their risks, and of course the mitigating actions to take. So the methods we performed for each question, research question 1, we first provided people some training in a sample VR video game. So we gave them a card which said what to do, how to put the headset on, and how to use the controllers, the controller in each hand. And there are just two main controls. One was using the joystick on the controller to swim around, and one was pushing the buttons on the controller to trigger a wave for help. So we did 2 training scenes on how to use the video game. Then they were put into the rip current, and then we recorded what they did. So that helped us answer research question number 1. And note, we did not tell people they're going to be in a rip current, because this in real life, the rip current isn't saying, I'm a rip current, watch out. So in this study, what we did was said this is we gave the context of this is a beach safety experience, beach safety virtual reality experience. And then we trained them and then said, okay, you're going to be put in a situation here, what would you do? So that sort of gave us sort of the surprise aspect of a rip current. Then research question number 2, we just simply did a follow-up interview after they went through the rip current, asking both Likert scale questions and open-ended questions to assess, was the rip current VR game effective at conveying the risk and helping them understand what to do? Was it memorable? Was it immersive? Do they now know what we should do in a rip current? So it's a little bit more on the VR video game. Just have some screenshots here. Obviously, it's you sort of have to be in it to fully appreciate it, but hopefully my description and the pictures help give a flavor for what it's like. So first we started with 2 training scenes. In the first, there is just a pair of buoys, and in order to pass the training scene, the participant had to swim through the buoys. We gave the instruction verbally and as a sound as well in the headphones. So swim through the buoys. So they use a joystick to swim through the buoys. So they showed how to swim. And by the way, on the bottom left there, that's what the headset you put on looks like, and the 2 controllers you hold. Then in the second training scene, we taught people to wave. So there'd be this little boat going around, and they're told to look for the boat and then push the button on the joystick to trigger a wave to the boat. So they were given the training on how to swim and how to wave. And of course, those are the 2 tools for getting out of a rip current: swim to swim parallel to shore, or wave to wave for help. Then we gave them the context of you're being pulled from shore. So the text said that, and also the voice in the earphones said you're being pulled from shore. That was the only context they were given. But visually, they were given a big cue, because now in the first 2 scenes, they just were they were stationary. Unless they were moving the joystick to swim, the player didn't move at all. But now in the rip current, they are being consistently dragged away from the shore. So you could tell you're moving, which can lead to a bit of a uncomfortable phenomenon in VR, just like real life. And they are set up to the default. You can look all around in simulation, but to start this rip current scene, they were looking at the shore, so they would see then the shore was starting to get further away, the boat was getting further away. So clearly they're moving, and the movement was not of their own volition. The movement was taken away from shore, which, as we know in real life, can trigger that panic situation where people are being pulled from shore. They start getting frightened. They don't know exactly what to do. So then we just let them to their own devices to see what they would do. Unknown to the player, we are tracking their stamina. So we just gave everyone the same sort of swimming stamina. Obviously, some people are better swimmers, some people are not as good. But it's hard to honestly self-assess something like that. So sometimes sort of give everyone the same swimming ability. Essentially, we said everyone has a stamina of 60. And if the player is not moving, their stamina goes down at 1 unit per second. Because obviously you're expending some energy just treading water. But if the player was swimming, their stamina would go down a lot more by 2.5 times per second. Because of course, if you're swimming, you're losing a lot more energy. So basically, it was a ticking stamina clock. And if you didn't do anything else, and your stamina went down to 0, you were said to have drowned. But there are actions you could take, the actions to get out of the rip current that you could take, and if you did those before the stamina went down to 0, then you were said to have escaped from the rip current. And one other context clue we gave was if the stamina went down to 20, so now you're 2/3 out, heavy breathing started playing in hopes of sort of triggering people to realize, okay, maybe I'm getting tired or running out of energy, because now you have this heavy breathing. All throughout this, there are sort of the normal beach sounds playing, so the waves washing, and you would hear the water splashing when you swam. But then if the stamina got down to 20 in this rip current scene, you hear this additional sound of heavy breathing playing. So 3 possible outcomes. I actually mentioned number 3 first. Stamina goes down to 0, you assume the player drowns. And the point of this stamina scheme is that if the player sort of just calmly looks around and tries to think about what to do, then they're not going to drown as quickly because they're not going to expend energy as quickly. Conversely, if they're panicking, swimming all around, not sure what to do, not making really any progress out of the rip, their stamina will go down more quickly. There's a better chance of them drowning, which is, of course, meant to emulate real life. So number 3 is the drowning outcome. Ideally, you have outcome number 1 or 2. Outcome number 1, if at any point they push that button to wave, they would see themselves waving. That would be considered waving for help. And that is then assumed that they would escape from the rip current. Someone would come help them. Obviously, might not work on an unguarded beach as well. But we're assuming people are swimming on a guarded beach, but we know that's not always true. Number 2 is the player escapes rip current. So we set up the program that, just like real life, there's just this narrow channel of the water that's a rip current. So that, of course, extended perpendicular from the shore. So if the player swam parallel to shore, pretty easily they would be able to swim out of it. And then that would also trigger the end of the rip current scene and the successful outcome of having escaped the rip current. So 3 possible outcomes. You can escape in 2 ways, either by waiting for help or just physically getting out of the rip current by swimming out of the channel. And then number 3 is, of course, not escaping, assumed to have drowned because the stamina went down to 0. And of course, we kept track of the ending stamina. So we ended up with 64 participants who agreed to do the whole thing, do the rip current video game, and then do pre and post questions about rip currents and then the specific experience in the game, and we did compensate them for their time. We did this on the South Shore Long Island, the town of Hempstead public town beach in a Point Lookout last summer in July and August. So the 64 participants, we had overall successful outcomes. 60 of the 64 escaped, and most of them did it by waving for help. 51 of the 64 people waved for help, and then that triggered their successful escape from the rip current. 9 of them escaped physically by actually swimming parallel to shore to get out of the rip current channel. Only 9 people did that. Then 4 people did drown. So then I have here the average ending stamina and the average time taken. So obviously the higher the stamina is sort of the better, because you're able to escape more quickly and you spent less time struggling against it. So as you might expect, this means that people who wait for help will generally have the highest ending stamina. They only went down an average from 60 to 42 because pretty quickly they realized they're having trouble and maybe they didn't even try to swim that much. Instead, they waited for help. And that on average took people around 9 seconds. People who escaped the rip current, they had a much lower stamina, 21, and a big reason why is because the stamina is programmed to go lower more quickly when you were swimming. So it didn't take them actually that much more time, but their stamina did go down a lot more because of the way we programmed this. So it took about 15 seconds, but they physically got out of the rip current, whereas people waiting for help were still there, but it's assumed that by calling for help, someone would immediately come to rescue. And then 4 people drowned, and notice their average time taken 24 seconds. So that means their stamina is on average going down by about 2.5 times. So basically these people pretty much spent the whole time swimming, flailing around, but not doing the proper thing. They swam trying to fight the rip current. And as we know, that can unfortunately be a pretty quick recipe for trouble, because you're just going to tire yourself out. You're not going to beat the rip swimming against it. You're just going to lose stamina and, again, possibly go underwater. If we dig down a bit more into the results in terms of the ending stamina and look at the bins here of 10, notice there is a bit of a skew to the right, slightly bimodal. So all of a sudden, a few more people did escape with a low ending stamina between 0 and 10. This could possibly be because of the trigger from the heavy breathing cue. So when your stamina hit 20, you started hearing the heavy breathing. So maybe that forced people to reassess their what they're doing, their strategy, and then maybe they eventually realized, oh, before it's too late, oh, I should wait for help or swim a different direction to get out. But most people had a pretty high ending stamina, since a lot of the people waited for help and figured that out pretty quickly on in the first 20 seconds or so. That's the ending stamina between 40 and 60 for a lot of people. So skewed right overall, but there is that little secondary peak here towards the low stamina. Again, perhaps triggered by that context clue of the heavy breathing. And of course, in real life, that is also possibly realistic as well. People sort of feel that they start getting tired and they might change their strategy. Similar thing with amount of time taken, skewed to the right. So most people figured out pretty quickly, again, in the first 15 seconds or so, what they needed to do. A lot of them just waiting for help. And then that is again marked down as successfully escaping. A few people were able to swim out. And even those who swam out did so pretty quickly, because they clearly knew what to do. Right away, they turned around, started swimming parallel to shore. And since the rip current was narrow, they were able to escape pretty quickly. Then we had a follow-up survey and asked people their thoughts on the VR experience in the video game. And the good news is people generally found it to be instructive and immersive. So 2 quick results there. We asked people on a Likert scale of 1 to 5, with 1 disagree the most and 5 agree the most. Do you feel better prepared for RIP after the VR? And the mean was 3.8. So most people tended to agree pretty well that yes, this was helpful in preparing for rip currents. Then the second was the VR experience immersive? And again, a very similar result. Most people saying that yes, this is an immersive experience, which past research shows generally means the information is more memorable and retained longer. So a good thing there too. And also in the free response questions, people generally said that the realism of this, being in the ocean, controlling yourself with the joysticks, having the 360-degree view, having the sounds, there's the ocean sounds as well, was realistic and impactful. There were some negative, of course, pieces of feedback, and I'll get into those a little bit later, but overall, most of the feedback was positive. In terms of some other results from the follow-up survey, again, just reinforcing how it was generally received well. one way to gauge if people thought this was useful or not was to give them these 6 statements, 3 sort of positive statements and 3 negative statements, ask them to select which one they most agreed with, and 53 of the 58 individuals who responded to this particular question were in the 3 positive statements. So it was either helpful because it's realistic, relatable, helpful because it prepared them or sort of helped convey the urgency of this hazard, or they taught them what to do, so now they took that lesson away. So almost everyone was in one of those statements as their biggest takeaway. So clearly, positive impression overall. Where I think this gets really interesting is when we start discussing the insights we get from these results into rip current behavioral response. That's where I think this work really helps to build on our previous knowledge. So one interesting aspect here was the vast majority of the people in this survey escaped the rip current and did so by waving for help. However, when we asked in the follow-up survey, what should you do to escape a rip current, only 20 people said that was the #1 preferred thing to do. So a lot of people did it in the moment, but then when reflecting, thought it wasn't, thought perhaps that swimming parallel was actually the best thing you're supposed to do, or even didn't really fully think about waiting for help as being the right thing, even though they did it. So why is there this discrepancy? Why did so many people do this action in the video game, but not necessarily then report it afterwards as the ideal thing to do? Well, one thing might have been our research design was a bit biased. The way we set things up was always the same. First, they learned how to swim, and they learned how to wave, and they're from the rip current. So maybe since even though it was quick, the training seems only took about 30 seconds, maybe because they learned how to wave right before the rip current scene and game, maybe that was more present in their mind than swimming out. So in the future, we can randomize the order of the training scene and see if maybe there was some bias there. #2, though, which gets into the behavioral response, is the idea that think about human nature. Rip currents come on often very suddenly with no warning. Maybe there's a rip current advisory. People might not even read that or realize that, know what that means, or they just didn't even check. Or maybe there isn't a rip current advisory and one still occurred. So rip current are a very sudden thing, and therefore we know humans do often panic when confronted with sudden, uncertain situations. So perhaps the video game was really emulating real life. And in the moment, in the video game, when they're in the VR, fully immersed in this beach experience, ocean experience, getting pulled away, and VR can incite panic, even if you're not, actually physically in danger, since you're fully immersed in it. So perhaps in the moment there, people either forgot the right thing to do, so maybe they knew, okay, I should swim parallel to shore, but in the moment, in the moment of panic, they just didn't remember to do that. So instead, waving for help was the easier, less complicated thing to do. So sort of a combination here. People forget what to do when sort of this sudden thing happens, and as part of that, perhaps just don't want to do the more complicated action. They don't want to think about, how do I swim? What's parallel to shore? What's the best way to go? So instead of just sort of call for help, that's a much less complex action to take. And that latter point is supported by the finding that in our follow-up survey, 20 respondents afterwards said that swimming parallel to shore is a proper action to take. So about 20 is about even in the post-survey. About 20 people said waving for help is the preferred action, and about 20 said swimming parallel to shore is the preferred action. But only 9 people in the simulation actually did swim parallel to shore to escape. So you have a gap. 20 people said you should swim parallel to shore, but only 9 actually did it. So in that gap there, of those people between the 9 and the 20, did they panic and forget what to do? Did they just wait for help instead? Certainly seems possible. The results of this work also helps to reinforce what I like to call the knowledge versus action gap. So there were 4 people who drowned, so relatively low, which was good. But of the 4 people that drowned, they all said they knew what to do in a rip current, even afterwards. but yet 3 of the 4 just totally were off in what a rip current is. They said the total wrong action to take when caught in a rip current. For example, they basically saying, yeah, swim back to shore in a rip current. So people are confident they know what to do, but what they know to do is actually the wrong thing. So then in the moment, they get in trouble because they have this wrong action in their head. And even so 3 of them said basically swim towards shore, which is wrong, or go with it or something. And then the 4th person said swim away out of it, but didn't specify direction. So that also shows incomplete knowledge, because swimming out of it to them might mean, if I keep going back to shore, I'll get out of it. So that's one aspect of the knowledge versus action gap. Then number 2, overall after the experience, 45 people said they knew what to do if caught in a rip current. But 10 of those 45, that's over 20%, said, yes, I know what to do in a rip current. And then the follow-up question to that was, okay, so what should you do? What is a rip current? But 10 of them incorrectly described a rip current when saying what they should do in one. So we had this clear gap. And those people said some different things. For example, some people call a rip current an undertow, which is obviously not what it is. Undertow takes people underwater. That's a lot different. But people assume that a rip current does take them underwater, which you can imagine then contributes to the stress and the panic, incorrectly thinking that a rip current is going to take you under, which then might cause people to panic more than they should and make that incorrect action, or just freeze up on what to do. Or people call it a rip tide, or just generally describe it in the wrong way. So we have here a lot of people thinking they know what a rip current is and what to do, but a sizable number of them, in this case, over 20%, not actually knowing the correct actions to do in a rip current. So clearly an issue there. So this sort of sets up, what are some barriers to the proper rip current response? What's the proper behavioral response, and why aren't people doing it? So clearly it seems, as I just said, some people don't know what a rip current is, or have limited knowledge, and therefore don't know what the right action is to take, which of course sets people up for trouble. And then 2, maybe the harder thing, obviously 1, we can solve fairly easily with with literature and outreach and all these different initiatives we're doing. Number 2 gets a bit trickier though, because now this simulation, this video game tended to show that some people, they got caught on a rip current, but still they panic and they're not sure what to do. They just forget what to do. The fact that a lot of people know to swim parallel to shore, but then in the moment of the video game, they didn't actually do that. So that's a much more difficult problem to solve, because number 2 is saying we've done our jobs correctly as scientists. People know swim parallel to shore in a rip current, but in the moment of getting caught in a rip current, sometimes they panic and don't do that. So we really need to be very careful and nuanced, therefore, in our communications to make sure that, especially this point number 2, this barrier is broken down. So perhaps maybe it's really reinforcing the outreach, or as I've been saying, having a rip current video game, allowing people to actually do it, maybe will then make it more memorable and allow people to panic less when confronted with the unexpected rip current occurrence. One caveat I wanted to mention on this study, it turns out, so we asked before they did the rip current video game, some basic demographic questions, and down here's we had to focus, of course, on where do you live in regards to the beach, how often you go to the beach, how often you go to the ocean, how well do you swim. Obviously, swimming ability is subjective, but you'll see all the results here point to the fact that, as you'd expect from a sort of a local town beach, not a place with a lot of tourists coming in, the vast majority of people in our survey live very close to the beach. Only 2 people live more than an hour away. Most people who responded went at least occasionally. But only a few people said rarely. Most everyone goes in the ocean at least occasionally, and most people thought they were pretty good swimmers. So put another way, we weren't really with the crowd that is in most danger from rip currents, and that sort of jives with the result, the fact that most people were able to escape generally by waiting for help, but a few people swam parallel swim parallel to shore. So this shows, what we'd expect, that a clientele here, people that go to the beach a lot, generally will know what to do in a rip current. And the fact that some of them still knew what to do and panicked, so that further reinforces, though, that it's not just people that go to the beach infrequently and are weak swimmers that are in danger. Really, we should be focusing our efforts on everyone. However, clearly, most of the fatalities do occur from people who go infrequently to the beach and are weaker swimmers. So when we repeat this work, definitely want to get a more broad sample size, and particularly ensure that people who go to the beach maybe every other year and live far away are surveyed to sort of see how they react in the rip current simulation. Because you'd expect if there's more of those people involved, the number of successful outcomes will go down, because they'll be dealing with people of less experience and might be more prone to panicking or just not knowing what to do because they're exposed to less rip current outreach and literature. So that's one aspect of future work. We're also, in light of the pandemic, redeveloping this into a more computer-based thing. So the VR, of course, you need a powerful computer, and then you plug in the equipment and people can do it. And more people do have this VR equipment, but it's still not universal by any means. It's still a fairly niche thing. And now, of course, during the pandemic, going in person and surveying people with the equipment is probably not something we can bank on the next year or two. So we're going to be redeveloping this in a computer-based game where actually you can just do the same thing as the VR, just on a computer screen, still be able to control yourself with the arrow keys and like click the mouse button to wave. And that will still be a pretty good simulation of things. And that will then allow us to get a much broader sample size to allow for better breakdown demographics, survey several hundred people, and then that way be able to break into smaller demographic groups with statistical robustness. For example, stereotypically you think maybe males drown more than females in rip currents because of various differences. But can we actually prove that in this video game situation? Or maybe that's not at all a thing, that's just a stereotype. And what other sort of demographic controls are there? Again, especially looking at people who swim less, go to the beach less. Are they going to have poorer outcomes than those who swim more frequently? So getting a larger sample size, easiest way to do that is remotely through computer, actually making going through Zoom like this and having people on Zoom do the simulation while we watch and record them, then answer the questions. Then we can go back and look at their actions they took in the video game, similar to what we did in this study, but maybe even expand on that by looking at the entire video of what they did and seeing, even if they did escape, do they struggle first, or do they swim parallel right away, or do they first swim against it and then go parallel? You can drill down even deeper than just the basic categorizations of escaped by swimming, escaped by waving, and drowned. And also some of the feedback on the survey, follow-up survey, said for the simulation, maybe do some more training scenes. Some people are less used to playing video games, and some are more, and you don't want that to be a factor in then sort of skewing things. So if you had more maybe optional training scenes, those who are comfortable with computers and games could skip those, but those who are a bit less comfortable could take those, and that will sort of even the playing field to make sure that we're just looking at the behavioral response to the rip current and not having something conflicting coming in, like people who just aren't as good at video games having a worse outcome, and then that's obviously not measuring what we want. And last but not least, I did want to mention we're also working on expanding this to other weather hazards. So we done hurricanes, rip currents, also looking at staying with the water theme, flash flooding, and doing a similar thing, doing a similar game, except where you're driving a car and then and see if somebody turns around when they hit a flooded part of the roadway. So this really has opportunity to be applied to hazards, again, that sort of dual goals you can have. One, being a memorable way to convey the hazard, and two, being a really good way to measure behavioral response without actually putting people in danger, but then as a result getting some fascinating insights, because it really is a simulation of reality. Last but not least, just wanted to show a quick clip here. We were able to receive some media coverage for all this when we were out on the beach last summer. So CBS 2 in New York came and did a story, and also Fox 5 in New York came and did a story. And they they actually then also simulcast it to other affiliates. So here's just a quick clip of the news covering this. Just a quick 2-minute clip. It also gives a better sense of what we're doing exactly.
So the whale is able to free itself. Bay constables are keeping an eye out for the whale to make sure that it's going to be okay.
A Long Island scientist is using virtual reality to show what it's like to get caught in a rip current. As Briella Tomasetti tells us, the technology could teach more people how to get out safely.
As Long Islanders flock to the shore this summer, Hofstra University is helping beachgoers, including myself, learn the basics of rip current safety before they get in the water.
It's surprising how little some people do know about beach safety and rip currents.
Researchers are swapping the traditional classroom setting for this brand new virtual reality equipment, immersing the user into an ocean simulation. The person wearing the goggles becoming the swimmer.
I think it's definitely helpful for people to know because you never know what situation you're ever going to be in, and just those little tips could really save your life one day.
Now, according to the United States Lifesaving Association, rip currents kill more than 100 people nationwide every single year, and also accounts for more than 80% of lifeguard rescues. Experts say, well, the main reason for that is not knowing how to get out of one.
Rip current themselves actually will not pull you under, but what might happen is, especially if you're a weaker swimmer or you get very nervous and scared, you'll fight the rip current and try to go back towards shore.
But as we learned in the simulation, the correct way to safely navigate out of a rip current is by swimming parallel to shore.
I think that's very important, and that some people, they need to learn it because some people aren't good swimmers and it's dangerous.
Hofstra University received $11,000 towards the purchase of 2 sets of virtual reality equipment through the New York Sea Grant program. Professors hoping it'll grasp the attention of the younger generation and bring more awareness to beach safety. Reporting in Point Lookout, Briella Tomasetti, Fox 5 News.
At the whale.
And that's all I have. Those are my references. Thank you for your time and attention, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jace. That was an excellent presentation. We're going to open it up for questions. For the participants, I direct you to the chat function and to open up your chat window. First of all, I would like to remind everyone to please fill out our survey after we're done. And I'm posting the link to that survey right now. Make sure it goes to everybody. So I'm posting the link to that survey right now. If you click on that link, it'll take you to the survey. Please fill that out. Also, I have couple of links for some resources on beach safety from our website, and I'm posting those too. You can check those out as well. And now we'll go to questions. If you could just type questions into the chat and I'll read them out. We have one from Chris Schubert, who asked, what was the gender breakdown of participants and did it bear out on results if known?
That's a great question. It ended up being a bit skewed towards males, for every reason about 40-20. And given that the sample sizes were fairly small, we didn't find any statistical significance in terms of the results for gender or race, ethnicity, or anything else. So that's definitely one motivating factor to expand the survey, get at least a few hundred people, and then we can hopefully be able to make some claims about gender. And also, only 4 people have drowned, so very few people have drowned. So you can do this with more people, especially less experienced swimmers, then we'll probably have a lot more people drowning, and then maybe be able to start making claims of what demographic controls seem to influence people drowning, having less success. Thanks.
Any other questions? Paul mentioned that about the news clip featuring Dr. Bernhardt. It was on CBS 2 News and Fox News, and at Point Lookout. This is this was in 2019 when you were doing this survey, and we have a link to if you want to see more of that. I'm posting a link that you can follow. So, anybody else have any other questions? So who are you developing the computer version? Is this going to be done through some programmers at the university, or are you contracting with anybody?
Yeah, probably the similar method of what we did for this work I just talked about. Usually do some of it myself, and I have a student research assistant, often from computer science at Hofstra, to also help with putting things together.
How will that be made available? Like, I guess.
Yeah, so
you can get people to try it out and collect data.
Yeah, ideally through Sea Grant, New York Sea Grant, and other Sea Grants, and other, the National Weather Service, all of our different outreach partners. When we have this happening, it'd be, great to collaborate and make sure it's shared through those sorts of media, and eventually something that could appear on the Sea Grant website, as I alluded to, alongside the PDFs and everything. Also, you could build in this little video game to play as well, sort of add to the ways people can learn about rip currents.
Yeah, I think that would be a good thing to work on, and I definitely think Sea Grant would work on that with you. We have another question from Becky. How will the results be used to inform outreach and education?
Great. So, I've been working with Kathleen Fallon on this from Sea Grant, Coastal Hazard Specialist. So, and as she mentioned at the beginning here, she works on some of the RIP literature. So it's certainly helping inform her work. Also, our partner at the national level, one of the co-PIs, Greg Dusek, also works on rip current outreach and awareness products in the national space through like NOAA. So again, he's also taking into account some of the results here. And as I mentioned, in response to Lane, getting these out there, that's the next stage of this, is making sure these are on the different partner websites so people can experience it themselves, because we've sort of proven with this work that it is useful to people and is memorable. So now we got to go get out and make it available for others to use to learn.
Any other questions? Jesse has a question. We, Minnesota Sea Grant, are funding development of a model of rip currents in the Great Lakes. Would such a model, which will determine speed and direction and fate, be useful?
Yeah, that'd definitely be interesting. You can chat offline. That'd be great. Thanks. One of the great things about doing this, doing the coding in the video game, is that it can tweak how fast or slow the rip current is, what it looks like. So yeah, the more knowledge, the better on that. I came in as a non-expert, only having minimal knowledge of rip currents. Obviously, I learned a lot more. But certainly the more we get, the better, the more realistic it can be. So certainly, yeah, that's important.
Sounds like an opportunity for a collaboration there.
Definitely.
We'll have to work on that. Here's the link to Kathleen's rip current fact sheet in the chat, so people can access that and share that with people. Any other questions?
I'm putting my email in the chat as well.
Okay.
Just my name at Hofstra.
Okay, one more thing. I just want to mention to everybody our hold on. That our next seminar will be on August 20th, and we'll feature Dr. Scott Steinschneider at Cornell University, who will be looking at a model and reporting tool on flooding in Lake Ontario. And then our final seminar will be in September, featuring Dr. Karen Lindberg and Kayla Smith at SUNY ESF, who will look at community reaction to dam removal. And we'll be sending out announcements about that, so keep an eye out. Any other questions? If not, we will conclude our seminar. And thank you, Jace. Thank you, Kathleen. This was very interesting, and we hope to see people at the next seminar next month. And please fill out the survey. Thank you.
Thanks.